Hey everybody, a little behind here. Had some ideas, but I forgot to record them. Month's been really busy. Dental appointments, hand, foot, mouth from the kids. Yay! So that Fate adventure wrapped up. So that's going to be the topic of this individual video. I've got some other ideas I'll record as well. That was a decent introduction to Fate. The GM has a lot to learn, and that is appropriate because we were his first ever face to face group that wasn't his family, and he had only ever run a game for his family once. So essentially, we were the second time he was face to face as a GM. Everything else has been play by post for him that he's been running. And he only knows two systems, which were Dungeons and Dragons and modernly. So I think it was fifth edition. It might have been third, and Fate. So two very drastic, like kind of different styles, which is good. And the reason why I list the number of systems he knows is because that's going to feed a little bit into the different experiences and different things that you need to kind of think about and balance and approach and blah blah blah. So now I got a decent idea about Fate. I don't think it was a great idea about what Fate was like because of some of the choices that he was making. He, similar to my video 2 videos ago about thoughts about storytelling and like building versus story, like just making a story out of what happens. um, that's really what happened here. Like he kept talking about Fate being a more narrative system, and as I've thought about it, I think what's probably a more accurate verbiage, again, I'm big on words and definitions, right, is that Fate is a descriptive system, right? That it doesn't just use quantities, it uses qualities to describe characters. And so, because the idea of like, hey, don't roll unless it matters, don't make players make tests unless the outcome of a failure could be interesting. That's not a new thing. It may be not a traditional trad thing. Traditional trad, that's redundant. But it's not new. It's a streamlined of play idea and let players, yes, unless you have a good reason, right? Kind of approach. And I think that's really important for what I'm saying because I think what he really wanted to do was tell a story, right? Like the amount of detail he had, and the amount of monologuing he did, made it evident to me after a short time, and some of the other players, that he had a story that he wanted to tell. It was also, unfortunately, a poor experience in a couple other ways. He did not understand introducing people to systems as much as like, hey, this is what we're going to do. And this is another reason why I think he had a story to tell, right? He had 3 players, one who had played Fate a while back, one who is recently running Fate without ever playing Fate, and that's my friend that I introduced to role playing. I think whatever. And then me, who had no experience with Fate other than reading the book a couple times. Fate Core. He explained some mechanics. He was playing with some of his house rules. But he never invited myself or that other player into describing our actions or blah blah blah. The most he did for that was we did have pre-gen characters, and he let us, like for me, I picked the character that was Faye. He had like this science fiction fantasy meld homebrew setting that he was working on. And he was like, well, what kind of Fae are you? Like, what do you want to be? What do you look like? Do you pass as human? You know, or whatever. I could be anything. And so he let me create that and blah, blah, blah. But when he came to like, oh, I made a successful roll, or oh, I failed at a roll, he would just take over and just narrate. My friend was taking initiative. She was much more comfortable with this. She was excited about doing that sort of thing, and she would just run with it. Though he did one time pause her narration to correct her on facts of either the setting or mechanics. Not mechanics, but it was like setting, like or that tool doesn't do that thing, or whatever it was. And she was like, oh, okay. And so she restarted, and she got like 3 or 5 words in, and he just started narrating right over her. Like he just spoke right over her, and it's like you really didn't need to do that. One, you don't need to override the person who already knows and comfortable with taking that initiative, and 2, you needed to be bringing us into it. Like it was really more about him, and there were other things I could say about the experience, but this isn't a rag on the GM thing. It's just I'm just trying to explain how I didn't actually get to really experience Fate. It ended up lasting 7 sessions. I will point out one more thing he needed to learn. He advertised it as 3 to 5, and we were nowhere near the end of it by the time we started the 5th session. And at that point, he should have said, y'all are adults, you have lives, what do we want to do about this? But he didn't. We pushed it to 7, and he ended up having multiple, like, optional side quests, so to speak, inside. And he basically pushed us into doing all of them, even though it was going way over. And he had at least one player saying they weren't necessarily interested in pursuing that, and let's just go finish that up. So real significant faux pas there on his part. But I went into that to say, like, so it ended up being like 7 sessions. We never refreshed, not once. He never compelled us on an aspect once, right? If you read Fate Core, there's basically like 2 kind of styles of compel, and one was kind of like, because you have this negative part to this aspect, I'm bringing this in, or because you have this aspect, I'm asserting, unless you want to push back with a fate point, that your character would do this, which will lead to this complication, right? So it was either directly out of it was a complication that was directly out of the aspect, or a reasonable expectation that a character would do something because of an aspect, which would then result in an aspect, right? The only thing he ever did was like literally one time we went into a spaceship, the door closed behind us, and he handed us a fate point and was like, nothing you try is going to open the door. It was like it was an event, but it wasn't an event based off of any of our aspects. That's the only time we got fate points back was when he did things like that. He basically railroaded the story and would give us a fate point because of it. And so clearly there are, and all the almost all the NPCs we'd faced had aspects that were descriptive of them, but not usable. Right? Like we couldn't find a way, like, and maybe it was our lack of play, but they were very descriptive. Like it might have involved like an adjective that described their character, but it was like this is the reason why they are like if they were stubborn, and we could see that they're stubborn through their interaction with them. On top of just seeing it as an aspect on there. But what are we going to do with that? Like they're stubborn, right? Like if this is an NPC we have a conflict with that we're trying to get to do something, well, stubborn's not helpful. You know? I mean, not without coming up with something else first, really, like backing them into something. So there wasn't a whole lot of real good like aspect usage in the entire game, other than oh, I didn't make this roll. Can I use this fate to, this aspect to re-roll it? And that usage was actually really, really loosely interpreted. Like, oh yeah, sure, okay. And then a few times like, no, I think that's a little too far. Blah blah blah. So, anyways, so I got some idea of what fate is like, but not. I don't think not well enough. And so I am starting. We've done one session of like care gen. We're not completely done of a fate game. We decided I wanted to do several things, and then I had a brainstorm because Fate Core Raw is not terribly. Well, it's not that it's not interesting to me, but what I want to do is, as I've said before, is like use a lighter system to help world build some aspects of the second setting that I'm creating. But I also want to make sure that some of the aspect that it is somewhat relatable to Rollmaster, right? Like at least conceptually, right? Like because the parts of the setting that equate to mechanics in Rollmaster, it's not that the mechanics of Rollmaster have to be present, right? Because I'm playing Fate, and those are two completely. We're not even talking apples and oranges. We're talking apples and steak, right? But the parts of the setting that are mechanical, so to speak, still have to have some kind of influence in the game. And so I had a brainstorm one night where I thought of a whole bunch of ideas, and maybe I'll make some other separate video about that later. I thought about doing that. About the adaptations and changes that I wanted to do. And so basically I had some ideas that basically emphasized a bit more of the classic traditional archetypes, that dove a tiny little bit into weapon specialization, but also, it wasn't so much weapon, it was more like, hey, you don't get to have a stunt in fight unless you're actually like, I studied up in fighting a bit, right? Like you don't just get to have a fight of one and have a stunt in fight. No. Sort of that, and then also the realms, the different distinct realms of magic that Rollmaster has, and therefore my setting has, and so we're starting that. I've got my friend Elle and my wife, and I did invite the other player who we all enjoyed each other's play from that Fate game, but. The day of the first meet, he was like, "Oh, I've underestimated my summer class, and I can't do this." But I did end up getting another friend to step into his place. So we've done one session. Carrigen, we have high concepts, troubles, and the first aspect, and the second aspect. They've traded character sheets once and come up with a second aspect. So remaining we have to do is. And most of them have already also picked out their skills. I think it helped them flesh out their ideas of their character a bit more. And I'm doing a 2-tip great pyramid. Because again, I want more skills present. And I did add some skills so I didn't mess up. I actually pretty much fell in line with the proportions of skills that they already have in Raw. So the proportions are the same, and scales. So that's nice. That worked out well. I worked really hard at that. So that's the Fate story. This video is almost already 14 minutes, and most people are going to watch 3. So I'll start making the next one later.